Hello, it is February 2026, and exactly 4 hours ago, the laws of physics seemed to pause. I'm talking about an event with a probability of absolute zero. At exactly 9:14 UTC, NASA's Deep Space Network in Madrid went silent. 7 seconds later, Goldstone in California followed, then Canberra, then ALMA in the Atacama Desert, then the Massive Fast Telescope in China. Every single radio ear humanity possesses was turned off simultaneously. Picture this. We aren't talking about a power grid failure. We aren't talking about a solar flare knocking out satellites. We are talking about the complete negation of the radio spectrum across the entire planet. For exactly 180 seconds, the sky was not just quiet, it was artificially muted, and the source. We tracked the interference vector. It didn't come from a hacker in a basement. It came from 3IATLAS. Think about that for a moment. Let the magnitude of that sink in. When you look at the logs from the Green Bank telescope right now, you expect to see cosmic background noise, the hiss of the universe, the static of the Big Bang, but at 9 hours 14 minutes and 3 seconds UTC, the noise floor dropped to absolute zero, a flat line across 14 gigahertz of bandwidth. To achieve that naturally is impossible. Nature is noisy, stars are noisy, black holes are noisy, even the empty vacuum of space has a hum. To create perfect silence requires an opposing signal of equal intensity broadcast with perfect phase inversion covering the entire Earth simultaneously. Think of it like noise-canceling headphones. To silence the outside world, the headphones must listen to the noise and instantly create an anti-noise wave to cancel it out. Now imagine doing that not for a pair of ears, but for a planet 12,742 kilometers wide. The energy required to dampen the entire radio spectrum of Earth for 3 minutes. It exceeds the total power output of our entire civilization for a year. Yet, at 9:17 UTC, the signal stopped. The noise returned. The telescopes came back online. But here is what keeps astrophysicists awake tonight. During those 3 minutes of silence, while every radio telescope was blind to the universe, as something passed through our atmosphere, something that didn't show up on radar because the radar frequencies were canceled out too. NASA is calling it a global destructive interference event. And I call it something else. I call it a handshake, because you don't turn off a planet's ears unless you want to whisper something, or unless you want to hide something massive. And what we found in the data logs of the silence, that is where the real mystery begins. When the screens went black at 9:14 UTC, the immediate assumption at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory was a system failure, a software bug, a power surge. In the control room, the initial reaction wasn't fear, it was annoyance. Engineers rebooted the receivers, they checked the liquid helium cooling systems on the antennas, they assumed the fault was terrestrial, they assumed the fault was us. But within 90 seconds, that assumption evaporated and it was replaced by a cold, hard realization. At 9:15 UTC, a frantic communication line opened between Goldstone in California and the European Space Agency station in Cebreros, Spain. The conversation was short. "Are you reading 0 on the Ka band?" Confirmed. 0 flatline. Then a third report came in. The Massive Fast Telescope in the Guiyang Mountains of China, the largest single-dish radio telescope on Earth, reported the exact same phenomenon. 3 continents, 3 different technologies, 1 impossible silence. Let me be very clear about what happened next, because the physics here is staggering. Usually when a radio telescope loses a signal, it picks up static. If you unplug the antenna, you get noise. But these telescopes didn't lose the signal, they were actively suppressed. The data shows a negative pressure on the receivers. Think of it this way. Imagine you are standing in a crowded stadium. Thousands of people are shouting. The noise is deafening. Suddenly, a device is turned on, and instantly you hear nothing. The people are still shouting. Their mouths are moving, but sound waves are being deleted before they hit your eardrums. That is what happened to Earth's radio astronomy grid. But here is where the story gets truly disturbing. When we analyzed the logs from the Very Large Array, VLA, in New Mexico, we found something that shouldn't exist. The silence wasn't a blanket. It wasn't a wide beam covering the whole Earth like a flashlight. It was a spotlight. The source of the interference, 3IATLAS, was targeting the observatories. As the Earth rotated during those 3 minutes, the interference beam moved. It tracked the rotation of our planet with the precision of 0.004 degrees. It kept the VLA in the dark. It kept ALMA in the dark. It adjusted its aim to compensate for the Earth's spin. Pause and realize what this means. A natural phenomenon cannot do that. A comet outgassing cannot do that. A solar flare hits the whole hemisphere. It doesn't snipe specific coordinates in the New Mexico desert to track a rotating target from millions of kilometers away and maintain a perfect phase cancellation lock. That requires calculation. That requires a feedback loop. That requires intention. At 9:16 UTC, just 2 minutes into the event, astronomers attempted a desperate maneuver. They tried to switch frequencies. If 3IATLAS was jamming the hydrogen line at 1,420 megahertz, maybe they could switch to the water line at 22 gigahertz. They tried to outsmart the silence. But the moment they switched frequencies, the silence followed them. It was adaptive. When the VLA switched receivers, the interference shifted instantly to the new frequency. The lag time was less than 0.8 seconds. That is the light travel time from the moon. But 3IATLAS is much further out. This implies the object anticipated the switch, or more terrifyingly, it was blanketing the entire spectrum simultaneously, effectively putting a lid on our ability to listen to the universe. The numbers don't lie. We have never seen this in the history of astronomy. We have seen pulsars that tick like clocks. We have seen quasars that scream across the cosmos, but we have never seen an object that reacts to us. An object that changes its behavior based on which button a scientist pushes in a control room in New Mexico. By 9:17 UTC, the panic was total. Governments were being alerted, and the military went to DEFCON status because their radar systems were experiencing ghosting. But then, just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. The noise floor returned. The static came back. The lid was lifted. But in that 3-minute window, while we were deaf, something else happened. Something visible while the radio telescopes were blinded. The optical telescopes, the ones that use mirrors and lenses, like the Hubble and the ground-based observatories in Hawaii, were still watching. They couldn't hear 3IATLAS, but they could see it. And what they saw during those 180s of radio silence explains why we were blinded. It explains why the interference was necessary. Because 3IATLAS did something during the darkness that it didn't want us to hear. It performed a maneuver that defies the laws of inertia, a maneuver that requires so much energy. The electromagnetic backlash would have fried our receivers if they hadn't been muted first. The silence wasn't an attack. It was a shield. And when you see the trajectory data I'm about to show you, you will understand why the silence was the only warning we were ever going to get. Now, here's what makes this fascinating. While the radio telescopes were flatlining, the Hubble Space Telescope was watching in the visible spectrum. And at 9:15 UTC, exactly 1 minute into the silence, Hubble's Wide Field Camera 3 captured something that defies Newtonian mechanics. 3IATLAS was moving at 24,000 kilometers per hour. It was on a hyperbolic trajectory, a slingshot path around the sun. According to every law of celestial mechanics, an object with that mass and velocity must continue on that arc. Gravity is a dictator. It does not negotiate. But at 9 hours, 15 minutes, and 22 seconds UTC, while the radio waves were being canceled out, 3IATLAS did the unthinkable. It stopped. Let me repeat that. It didn't slow down. It didn't break over the course of hours. It stopped relative to the solar wind for 4.6 seconds. Then it accelerated instantly at a vector of 88 degrees perpendicular to its original path. Think of it like a bullet fired from a rifle. The bullet is traveling at supersonic speed. Suddenly, mid-air, it halts for a split second, turns 90 degrees to the right, and accelerates away faster than it was moving before. That is physically impossible for a bullet. And for a comet the size of a mountain, it is a violation of the conservation of momentum. The g-forces involved in that maneuver would be in the range of 14,000 gigaseconds. That is enough force to flatten a skyscraper into a pancake instantly. No known material in the universe, not diamond, not carbon nanotubes, not even the hull of a theoretical spacecraft could survive that kind of stress without disintegrating into plasma, unless the laws of inertia were being manipulated. This is where the physics gets truly exotic. The only way to execute a 90-degree turn at 24,000 kilometers per hour without being destroyed is to modify the local space-time metric. If you can bend space around the object itself feels zero acceleration. It is falling into a new gravity well that it created for itself. This is the principle of an Alcubierre drive, a theoretical warp drive. But creating a localized gravity well requires energy, colossal energy. To warp space enough for a mountain-sized object to turn on a dime, you need the energy output of a small star. And this brings us back to the silence. Why did the radio telescopes go dead exactly when this maneuver happened? Why did the interference start at 9:14 and end at 9:17, bracketing the turn perfectly? And the answer is terrifyingly simple. The silence we detected wasn't silence at all. It was the exhaust from the engine. When you manipulate gravity, you release gravitational waves, but you also release a massive electromagnetic pulse, a backwash of radiation. If 3IATLAS had performed this maneuver without shielding Earth, the electromagnetic shockwave would have fried every satellite in orbit. It would have ionized our atmosphere. It would have been a global EMP event. So 3IATLAS did something precise. It emitted a countersignal, a phase cancellation wave directed specifically at Earth to dampen the noise of its own engine. It wasn't trying to hide from us, it was protecting us from the sonic boom of its own. And acceleration. Think about the sophistication required to calculate the exact frequency needed to cancel out the shock wave hitting Earth, while simultaneously executing a 14,000 gigabytes turn, requires a computer system beyond anything we can imagine. It requires real-time knowledge of Earth's position, our atmospheric density, and the exact sensitivity of our instruments. This changes everything. We're no longer talking about a rock. We are no longer talking about a strange comet. We are talking about a machine that cares about collateral damage. At 9:16 UTC, the European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory noticed a secondary anomaly as 3IATLAS accelerated away on its new, impossible trajectory. The space around it shimmered. The light-formed background stars was lensed, warped. This confirms the warp bubble hypothesis. The object has a mass that fluctuates. One moment it behaves like a comet, the next it has the gravitational footprint of a black hole. And the destination, When we calculate the new trajectory, the one created by that impossible 90-degree turn, it is no longer heading out of the solar system. It is no longer leaving. The new path, verified by 3 independent orbital models, puts 3IATLAS on an intercept course, not with Earth, but with something much closer, something critical to our survival. Wait until you see where it is going. The old trajectory had it missing the sun by millions of miles. The new trajectory, it brings it within 0.04 astronomical units of the sun's photosphere. It is diving into the star, but it's not a suicide dive. A suicidal object doesn't protect the ants on the sidewalk before it jumps. It doesn't silence the radio waves of a nearby planet to spare their electronics. This object has a mission, and the energy signature it is emitting now, post-maneuver, has changed completely. The silence is over, the engine is off, but now the broadcast has begun, and what the Deep Space Network is picking up now, after the silence ended, is even more disturbing than the silence itself. Because the signal isn't random noise anymore, it is structured, it is repeating, and it is counting down. When the silence ended at 9:17 UTC, the technicians at the Deep Space Network didn't just see the noise floor return to normal. They saw something else. Buried within the static, hidden in the background hum of the universe, was a new signal, a signal so faint, so precise, that it had been masked by the sun's radiation until the silence cleared the airwaves. And it wasn't a broadcast of prime numbers. It wasn't a greeting. It was a negative signal. Usually, a radio signal is a spike above the noise, a peak on a graph. But this signal was a series of dips in the solar wind data. It was a modulation of the sun's own output. So think about the scale of that. To modulate a star requires modifying the plasma flow itself. It requires interacting with the sun's magnetic field directly at 10:42 UTC, just over an hour after the silence event. An analysis by the University of Manchester's Jodrell Bank Observatory confirmed the pattern. The dips were repeating, but the interval between them was shrinking. The first dip lasted 12.4 seconds. The second lasted 12.3 seconds, and the third lasted 12.2 seconds. It was a countdown, a precise linear decay of time. If you extrapolate that mathematical curve forward, if you plot the rate of decay on a graph, the countdown reaches zero in exactly 38 days. April 2026. What happens on April 2nd? Astronomers cross-reference the date with every known celestial event. No eclipses, no planetary alignments, no comet perihelions. But then, a solar physicist at the High Altitude Observatory in Colorado noticed something terrifying. The countdown wasn't tracking an event on Earth, it was tracking the sun's own cycle. The solar cycle is currently peaking, solar maximum is imminent, the sun is more active now than it has been in 2 decades, and the negative signal from 3IATLAS, the modulation of the solar wind, is perfectly synchronized with the sun's internal dynamo. It is pulsing in rhythm with the star's heartbeat, but 3IATLAS is now accelerating toward the sun. It is on a collision course with the photosphere. This isn't just a probe observing a star, this is a probe interacting with a star. If 3IATLAS impacts the sun on April 2nd, at the exact moment the countdown reaches zero, the energy release could be catastrophic. We are talking about an object with a warp bubble signature slamming into a star at relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy alone would trigger a solar flare 10,000 times larger than the Carrington event. A flare that size would strip our atmosphere. It would fry our power grids permanently. It would end modern civilization in 8 minutes. the time it takes for light to reach Earth. The silence was a shield to protect us from the turn, but the countdown is a warning about the impact. And now we have less than 6 weeks to figure out if this is a refueling mission or an execution. So here we are. It is February 23rd, 2026. The telescopes are back online. The silence has ended, but the countdown has just begun. We are staring at a deadline. April 2nd, 2026, 38 days from now. What happens when the timer hits 0? There are 2 possibilities, and both are terrifying. Possibility 1, the silence was an act of mercy. The 3IATLAS object shielded us from its engine exhaust because it is benevolent. It is approaching the sun not to destroy it, but to refuel, to harvest energy, to stabilize the solar cycle that has become erratic. Maybe it is fixing our star. Maybe the countdown is a maintenance schedule. If that is true, we will witness the most spectacular light show in human history, and then it will leave, but there's possibility. 2, the silence was not mercy, it was indifference. The shielding was a byproduct of the warp bubble, not a conscious choice to save Earth's electronics, and the countdown is a fuse. If an object with the mass of a mountain impacts the sun at relativistic speeds, the kinetic energy transfer would be equivalent to billions of hydrogen bombs detonating inside the photosphere. Simultaneously, the shockwave would eject the coronal mass ejection, CME, directly at Earth, a super flare that would arrive in 8 minutes and 20 seconds. We would have no warning. The satellites that warn us, SOHO ASCOs, would be blinded instantly by the X-rays. The internet would vanish. The power grid would melt. Modern civilization would end before we even finished our morning coffee. NASA is currently running simulations. The European Space Agency is retasking every available telescope. The Chinese government has gone silent on the matter. But one thing is certain. We cannot stop it. We cannot deflect it. We cannot communicate with it. We are ants watching a boot descend from the sky. We don't know if the boot is trying to step over us or on us. The silence lasted 3 minutes. It gave us a taste of a world without signals, a world without connection, a world in the dark. Now, we have 38 days of noise left. If you are watching this, look at the sun tomorrow morning. Really look at it, because whatever 3IATLAS is doing to it, whatever that countdown means, the clock is ticking, and on April 2nd, the sky will either light up with salvation or with fire. I am Michio Kaku for 3IATLAS.